Hey guys, in the shop here. So I have a couple of hand-forged Frontier style knives to make. I've been making them out of coil spring from a Mustang car, an older Mustang car. So kind of neat knives for that reason, if nothing else. So I find that about half of a coil, if you will, works pretty well for a 5-inch blade on the knife. So these are the sections of the coil spring in the forge, also a piece of leaf spring. That's for a different knife. So those are going to get heated up. We're going to straighten those out and then start working on the actual knife forging process. So at this point I have about 2/3 of the piece of coil spring flattened out, and I'm already starting to put the bevel into what's going to be the blade portion of the knife. So as you can see, that's close to 5 inches. That's what I have flattened out there. Go ahead and switch to the next one, which is about the same thing here. So I'm hammering more on the side of the edge. It's going to be the edge of the knife, and I'm going to get this blade portion of the knife kind of hammered out, figured out before I come back and do the tang of the handle. So as you can see right there, I hope it's thinner on this side than it is on this side, significantly. So you'll notice if you hammer along one edge of your piece of steel more than the other, your steel is going to start curving like this, and that's because you're expanding this side of the metal and not this so much. So as you're going along, you're going to have to compensate for that. But if you do it right, you don't really ever have to try to bend it back. So as you can see right here, this is starting to curve up a little bit. I don't really want that. So I still have enough thickness here that I can come back here and displace that steel, and as you can see, it's straightened that little crook out, and I still have plenty of stock along the backside here. So it's just really watching that. And as you go along, you can keep what's going to be your blade nice and straight by hammering appropriately, without ever having to come in and try to do this number, which the thinner it gets, the more difficult that is to actually do. So this particular knife blade style has a pretty rounded point on it. Which is going to be refined by grinding, of course. Now obviously as I continue to hammer on both sides, more on one side than the other, but still on both sides, I'm going to lengthen out my steel here. I want the spine of this knife, the thickest part, to be about 5/32 of an inch. So here I'm switching to my rounding hammer, which gives me the ability to push a little bit more steel through this area and get a little bit more of a bevel. The good thing about propane forges is that unless you have an air blast or forced air on them, they tend not to get as hot, so you're at the lower risk of actually burning or ruining your steel, so that's nice. Just double check my overall dimensions here. It's a little crooked, go ahead and straighten that out just by expanding the other side of your blade by hammering on that side. None of this stuff right here. You want to go for a uniform thickness along here as best as you can. Okay, I'm going to start working on the handle portion of this one. Double check my dimensions. That's close. Clean this one up a little bit. I don't want that that wavy kind of edge going on there. So come in there, grounding hammer a little bit, and take that out. Same thing again, I'm going to have to draw this out a little bit more here to get my desired length of the blade. This is still thick enough to where I can kind of straighten it just like that without curling it over. See what I'm trying to go for there. I am now putting the forged knives into the kiln for some normalizing cycles. There's a lot of grinding to do, well, a fair amount of grinding to do on these yet to refine the shape that I want, but you'll notice I have not done any grinding on them so far. I'm going to do 3 complete normalizing cycles on them before I do any grinding, and there's a reason for that. So you may have heard of decarburization, and decarburization is something that happens when you, well, in the knife making world, basically something that happens when you heat steel up to high temperatures and it oxidizes. That's how you get slag that comes off of your steel when you forge it. What happens is you essentially lose, that slag is essentially carbon that's kind of cooked out of the steel, and you lose carbon on the outer skin of your steel, and if you leave it hot enough, long enough, or enough times, you run the risk of ending up with a knife that the outer layer of steel, even up to about 1 millimeter thick, is devoid of, or almost devoid of, carbon, or I should say at least has a lot less carbon than it should for the steel that you are using, and you end up with a low carbon steel on the outside of your blade essentially, which obviously is not good. So I am doing the normalizing cycles before I take any of the steel off.